going to be what I'm going to say anyways.
Okay.
Oh,
wait, we can start. Are we starting?
It's 5 o'clock. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 5 o'clock, Wednesday, May 10th, 2023. We are convening a workshop meeting of the City Commission for the primary purpose of whatever our city attorney wants to talk to us about. I will let you take the meeting over at this point, and thank you, Scott, for being here. Appreciate it. This is obviously talking about the Automall Orange Camp project. Brief history. Oh, I'm sorry. For the record, all of the commissioners are present, as well as the city attorney, as well as Rob Doan, attorney for the Orange Camp Point project, and the city administrator. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. The project started with the property owner asking years ago to annex into the property to build the auto mall. We had a called an employment center land use over there, which that was contiguous to the property he wanted. It annexed in. The use proposed was consistent with our land use. So we started the annexation process, got into a dispute with the land. We settled down where we each kind of annexed our portions, and the project was approved. And then the economy changed, COVID hit, and basically we can assume that the auto malls are not going to get built, so that's not an option. There were some discussions over the period of time about possibly mixed-use project there, and then ultimately they came back and wanted to do residential. And we had to amend our comprehensive plan land use designation to allow residential in the employment center. We brought you a proposed land use change. You all voted that down, 3-2. I started working with Rob, asking him, what can we do to make this commercial project more marketable, more enticing to the public from a regulatory standpoint. And I'll talk a little bit more of that later, but basically, my discussions with Rob was, if you really want commercial there, we're going to have to talk about incentives to entice commercial developers to come to the property. So ultimately, we had a workshop, and the owner came in, presented a mixed-use project. There was commercial apartments, and then there were some residential apartments, and then commercial out parcels. And that didn't seem to get, basically the same, wasn't a warm fuzzy for everybody, so kind of the same type of responses all the commercial had. Now, up until that point, your options were, from a policy standpoint, you have the ability to say, we want to hold out for commercial and not change the land use. Or you could work with a developer to try to come up with something. Those were your two options. And then the legislature stepped in this last legislative session. And I briefly mentioned it to you the other day, a few days ago, a week ago, maybe 2 weeks ago, at a meeting that said, just overview of the law, what the legislature has now said. But I had just gotten the law. I wanted to review it in more detail and then also see what the developer could do under our regulations. So we spent some time doing that. We're meeting with the planner, and that was the memo I sent to Lee. And I think Rob Pat got it too. Rob and I talked. I don't think Rob and I have a whole lot. I don't think we have any substantive major disagreements on it, but there are some ambiguities and things that would have to be worked out. But basically, what the law has said is the legislature has preempted local government on 3 areas: use, density, and height for multifamily residential with affordable housing. Basically, what the law says is any industrial, commercial, or mixed-use designated property, the owner has a right to do a multifamily project to the maximum density allowed within the jurisdiction, residential density, to the maximum height the jurisdiction allows within 1 mile of the project, with the caveat that if the jurisdiction has less than 20% of its total land area that is designated commercial or industrial use, the local government can require a mixed-use project. As a mixed-use project, the law says at least 65% of the square footage of the project has to be residential, and 35% can be commercial. The other caveat is, for the whole project, 40% of the units have to be affordable housing. If you don't propose any affordable housing, then you don't get to develop under that law, that type. And this is something they can pursue as a matter of right. To the extent that something, you would have to amend your comp plan or zoning to allow that project. It is approved administratively. It does not come back to you. But it also says, other than those three areas, use, density, and height, they have to comply with the remainder of our regulations. So that's where we're at the last meeting. So what you really now have, you have three options on the table for this project. You can still hold out for commercial if you want. You can still negotiate some type of a project with the property owner. Those are the first two things that you have for. But now there's a third option, that the developer has a right to develop this property as the law allows. I cannot tell you exactly what the developer can do, and you'll see why as I go through it. But what we're doing since our last conversation is say, all right, let's get a handle on what could this person, Mr. Hurley, develop, possibly do. So for starters, what is our maximum residential density in Lake Helen? 8 units per acre. That is our downtown commercial density. From a development standpoint, our comp plan says the area that is being used, devoted to the residential development, is how you calculate your density from. So if you think back to the proposal that Mr. Hurley submitted, where part of the property was residential, then the other part was commercial, and it's mixed use, but there are two separate areas. Our comp plan would say you only get your density off of the land that you are devoting to residential. So depending on how they lay this project out, will depend on how many units per acre. I don't know. Now, if they intersperse commercial and residential, multifamily residential together,
They can use it all.
then we can apply it all. They qualify for all of it. But if it's 19 acres and the balance over here is commercial, 19 acres. The other limitation is how much square footage is the development going to be? Because that then says, well, 65% of that square footage has to be residential. So until we have that layout, what does that do? And what Rob was pointing out is probably another one of the areas that's kind of gray. It says at least 65% of the square footage has to be residential of a mixed-use project. Well, there's a couple ways you can interpret at least. Is that, so say they come in with 85%. Well, that's at least 65. Does that comply with the law? Or I seem to interpret it as they want to make sure there's at least 65, so that the whole purpose of this law is a residential affordable housing, to address residential housing, basically, is what the whole purpose of this law is. Because if you say minimum anything over the 65 still complies, well, 100% complies. And then we got a mixed use. So that, to me, I think it's more they just wanted to make sure that there was at least 65% there, so they can say it's supporting the purpose of the law, which is to increase residential housing in the state of Florida, which is obviously a problem.
So let me interject a question. So if it's called mixed use, it couldn't be 100% residential, then, could it? That would not be
No,
mixed.
that's what I'm saying.
So if it's like 2% commercial,
That's where it's
That's where it says.
Okay, that's making sure that's what I heard.
Yeah, that's where it kind of doesn't make sense. That's why I interpret it to say, we couldn't say we want 50% or
If they allow, you know, a hot dog.
They want
I
it,
think. You know, I don't know.
Well, and honestly, square footage of what?
Right.
They didn't say.
Of that 65%, again, how much of that is low-income housing?
Well, 65% has to be residential for a mixed-use project. Minimum 65% has to be square footage of the project, has to be for the residential purposes, of which 40% of that has to be affordable. But my point is, square footage of what?
Of what?
You know, they don't, is it just a living area? You know, the occupied space, do you count the parking lot, or you count the total area? I think it would be somewhat self-regulating as long as you were consistent in how you apply it. You know, how you calculate the total and how you allocate it. And so I think it would work, but they didn't address that. But until we know how much acres you're going to use and how large the site is, we really can't tell you this is how many units could be there or how many affordable units could be there. Because it's just, that's a variable we have control. Now the other thing is, what zoning would apply to this property? The two types of zoning which seem applicable, you know, we have a, the PD development that we have right now, which is not going to work because that's designed for commercial development. We have two types of mixed-use zoning, I think that would be applicable. We have the downtown commercial zoning, which is the one that's consistent with the comp plan that provides the 8 units per acre. Now that one would not be a development agreement where we negotiate and lay out things. That's kind of what I refer to as traditional zoning, where there's certain things that as long as they meet certain things, then they can go forward and develop. And there may be some things in there that we like, there may be some things in there we don't like, but it is what it is. There's another one that's called mixed-use PD, where we then would have a lot more discretion and flexibility to lay it out similar to what we did the auto mall. It was that type of development agreement. But they do have, and the law takes up there July 1st. You know, in talking with Rob, I think, you know, I won't take away whatever he's going to say, but I think his client can't wait any longer. You know, he's got to do something. So I think from our perspective, we should assume that, you know, July 1st, we're probably going to get a development proposal from them consistent with how they interpret the law. And I think we're just going to have, there's going to be a lot of administrative review of that. How much of it would have to come back to y'all for approval, I don't know. There's a couple things that my goal is to try to inform you the best I could on what the law says. Secondly, make sure you understood that we have more than 2 options right now. There's that. Absolutely has a right to build residential over there, and he absolutely has a right to put a Ford in. He has to put a Ford in. It's not optional. If he wants to pursue that option, he has to put the affordable housing in there. And then there was some discussion about, you know, what type of housing would go over there. If you want residential, or if you don't want, I don't know what to say, if you could accept residential but not affordable housing, the only way to get there is to negotiate something with them. But I think we probably need to start that sooner than later. I think if we get to July 1st, we're going to have a project coming from them. And you can always negotiate, or never know what will happen. Now, but there's 3 options. I think it would be safe to assume that if we don't negotiate something, then we're going to be stuck with whatever the law allows them to develop. I think just from an assumption standpoint. Now, they may get into it and find out that's not economically feasible, but I don't think sitting there holding vacant land is economically feasible either. So I just think we should assume that's going to happen, kind of the worst case scenario. That's something I want to touch on. And another thing, obviously, what you should, they're going to have to comply with our multifamily regulations. If we require multifamily, we do not have to require multifamily under the law. The way it's worded, we have the option of mandating multifamily pursuant to the percentages I discussed. But we could always just do a residential project with maybe even less commercial than what they're requiring. But we have that option to mandate something, but we could also just strictly residential, just commission didn't want that, so my memo, I just assumed that's off the table because it was voted no. You do have the ability to do that, we don't have to mandate, because
Even if it's a subdivision residential project rather than multi-family apartment house, would you still be required to be a certain percentage to be a low-income housing?
well, if they pursue under the law, they have to do multifamily,
Okay.
not single family.
Yes.
And then they have to have 40% low income.
Okay.
Could we do single family residential over there? We'd have to change land use to accommodate
That
that.
would just be negotiated, it wouldn't have anything to do with that law.
Right, exactly. I mean, if they wanted, that has not been on the table for discussion. But we do have goals, in our company, we have goals about how mixed use has to be developed. And that still will be applicable to this development. Even if they pursue so they can come forward with a law and say, we're going to develop under law, we're going to say, well, we want mixed use. And then we apply all of our other mixed use regulations to it. And either, if we can negotiate a mixed use project under the law, then we can do the mixed use one. I think that would have to come back to y'all for approval, because I don't see how the law can mandate an agreement. But if we don't come to an agreement on that, then they're really the only avenue, I think, would be to pursue the downtown commercial zoning, which has no development agreement. It's your standard zoning where you have, these are your uses and these are your setbacks, and it's all set forth in code. As long as you meet those things, you're allowed to move forward with the development. So, now the other thing I would just want to touch on, it always, seems that people hit the wrong way when we talk about economic incentives, development incentives. I just want to make sure you understand what they are, how they work. I don't like them either. I don't like the idea of that a client has to give taxpayer money to a private developer to entice them to come. And I understand how that rubs people the wrong way. But the truth of the matter is, and the bottom line is, legal, and everybody does it. So if you want to entice somebody to come into this community with a commercial development, you either play the game or you don't. And the game includes development incentives. And if you don't do that, you may become a lot less attractive to any developer because somebody else is offering incentives. The other thing to understand is you're not giving money that you currently, it's not like you said, our budget's so tight, where are we going to come up with this money? The economic incentives is a percentage, negotiated percentage, of future tax revenue the city receives off the development because it appreciates the land, we've got the increased revenue. Hypothetically, say the owner over there is paying $10,000 a year in taxes. The development goes through, and now we're receiving $500,000 a year in taxes. So our tip, sometimes referred as increment money, we have a $490,000 increase of tax revenue. That's what we're talking about giving someone a share of. So we're giving the developer a percentage of revenue that we currently don't receive. And that's all being subject to negotiation. Usually you're reimbursing certain capital improvements or certain things that the public has access to justify the public expenditure. But the bottom line is I don't like it any more than anybody else, the concept of it. But if you truly want a commercial development there, especially with today's economy of commercial development, I don't see it happening unless we offer some type of incentive. And it doesn't mean you have to agree to what they ask for, but if you just say flat out no from the beginning, I just think you're really closing your door to that. Until it gets to the point that all the other commercial property in this area has developed, and that's the only site plan. At that point, maybe you have something, the city will have something that they can say, okay, we've held out long enough that everybody's developed everything else, so we don't have to offer. Well, one, I don't know when that happened. Two, with the change in the law that just happened, you may not be able to hold out. You may get a mixed-use project with residential and affordable housing put there, and there's nothing you can do about it. Nothing at all. So the only other option is try to work with the developer to come up with something. Well, what I would hate to have happen, and it could happen, is we just say, hey, the legislature gave you a right, you go pursue whatever rights you have. And what we end up with is a project that we're not happy with, and they're not happy with it. It doesn't, you know, but something is done there just because that's the only thing that was allowed, and have we really benefited anybody by sitting there and saying, all right, well, you're allowed to build this, just go build it, and we're stuck with something we don't really like, the public doesn't like, and the developer's not that happy either. So everybody kind of looks really unhappy with it. So, but that's generally what I wanted to go through. I cannot tell you exactly how many units they're going to be able to build as a matter of right until they submit it. There's the potential for disagreements, which always can lead to litigation, but, you know, because of some vagueness in the way this is written and how it's going to be applied. The other thing that you should obviously take away from this is this, at least the legislatures right now, that is willing to stick their nose into local government business far further than I think they should. And they just did. I mean, this is I've never seen something like this really, you know, but where they actually come in and say, we're going to ignore that. I don't care that the content says this is industrial property. You put residential, put multifamily, whatever. Government can't stop you, no government can stop you. That's a pretty big step for the state. But I don't know if someone can challenge it.
Has any city challenged the state on it yet?
But I don't know if they can challenge it before it takes effect. I don't know about that, but
Yeah, the article said they probably will be being challenged. But
it could. But always remember everything.
Right.
Yeah. But when I always go back to people say, "Oh, it violates home rule." Well, if you read home rule, it's subject to we're created by the state, so we are subject to state law under home rule. So the way it's kind of set up, you have home rule to the extent the state says you have it. I mean, there are people who are going to challenge it, they're going to make issues, and I think it's totally inconsistent with the comprehensive plan. That's what it's completely inconsistent with. You got to do all this. You got to
Jump all these things to the comp plan together
and then they say, never mind. So. But that's kind of where I think the area of the law is. I don't know if you have any questions. I'm going to let Rob, address some issues if I missed anything.
How does the 20% of commercial designated area in the municipality play into it?
Well, that's because that allows us to ask for the mixed use. If there's 20%, less than 20% of our area in the jurisdiction is commercial industrial, so if you have designation of less than 20%, that then gives us the ability to say it has to be a mixed-use project.
Has that been determined?
Yeah, we're less, yes, we're significantly less.
That's what I figured.
Yeah, so we're in that 20%, so we can't ask for the mixed-use project if the commission desires to go that.
Even though mixed is not defined.
Well, it's defined as at least 5% residential, so.
Well,
But other than that, it just kind of says, you still have to kind of comply with all of the local government's regulations.
Yeah.
So, we have criteria for mixed use, that we want to see how it will be developed. But it was odd to me that they referred to square footage. That's without designating square footage of what? Usually things are based on acreage.
Was there a parallel, what's the word I'm looking for? A situation where they're using square footage to identify something else in the rules of, in other words, that you could draw an analogy?
Not that I can,
No.
it just says, somebody square 65% of the square footage of the project. What's the project? And I even read the staff analysis of the bill from the legislature, and to see if that kind of gleaned some information. And it was very, very helpful in addressing all of these other issues, except this fact. All they did was recite what the law said in the staff analysis. Everything else, because the bill was big, it dealt with funding, it dealt with tax exemptions and tax credits and all this other stuff. But it spent very little time talking about this particular aspect of the bill, which is what I was looking for. So, and Rob says there's been cleanup bills proposed to address some issues, but nothing got passed this session. But until something gets passed, we can't count on anything to be there. And the only thing you can count on is the state legislature currently really doesn't care about your what do you think your home rule rights are? That's pretty clear.
It also says if they use the sale program, they can't use the statute.
What's that now?
If they use the sale program to construct the apartments, they can't use this statute. They have to abide by the city's rules.
There's a lot of regulations when it gets into, and, you know, some of that affordable housing, they've expanded. I read it and I didn't pay close attention to it, but it seems like you get pretty much tax abatement for a while. So if you think you're going to get a big tax benefit by having an affordable housing project, no, I think you're not. The legislature just said it's exempt from taxation for a certain period of time. So that's part of the incentive the state gave them to develop. Obviously, there's an issue with affordable housing in the state, and the state was trying to address it. And so they provided the funding, they provided exemptions, and they preempted local government on our ability to regulate where they go.
We're a hotel state, and there's a plethora of labor there, and those corporate industries don't really want to pay them any more money than they have to, so it was of their interest to push this.
Okay. It had a lot of support. I mean, there was no, even the League of Cities
It
support.
was almost unanimous.
Yeah.
Well, I think the Senate was.
Yeah. I think there were only 2 or 3 people in the House that didn't vote for it, and even the League of Cities supported it. So, it was going to be passed. It was, the League of Cities and the League of Counties didn't oppose it.
Well, what it also tells you is if there is a glitch bill, it's going to be to clarify things. It's not going to take any teeth out of it. There's too much support.
You know, the level of income that designates which level of affordable housing it is based on the median income
Correct.
of our area, which you have to look at the census reports and stuff like that to see that.
So I guess really what it would be, we can't talk about details of the project, right? There's nothing like that, and there's nothing for you all to vote on. We can't vote on a whole workshop anyway. What would be most helpful for me, and I think for Rob, and for Lee, is either direction that we work with Rob and the owner to bring back some type of a mixed-use project in whatever parameters you want to tell us, that would be more helpful. Or let them develop what they're entitled to under the law. That's really the kind of direction, right? Because I'm assuming you all don't want to do residential, entirely residential. You know, so, because you voted no already. So we have those 2 options. Unless you want to, if you really want to hold out for commercial, then, like I said, I think we need to look at development incentives and see, give people and say, what type of incentives do we need to provide to entice somebody to do a commercial development?
Yeah. And before we get too far down that road, I mean, one of the reasons I wanted to do this was twofold. And thanks, Scott, for all the work you did on it, looking at it, and looked at it together. And I want to be completely transparent about the conversations we're having on our side about it. So, one, the economics of the situation are driving the bus. Mr. Hurley has his life savings, the sale of his dealerships, everything wrapped up. I read the transcripts from a planning board meeting where this was discussed a little bit, and there was some maybe misinformation and stuff. People just didn't know, and speculating whether he owns the dirt or he doesn't, and talking about the Stewart family to the north's not interested. This has nothing to do with the Stewart family to the north, never has. Right? This is just 50 acres right along Orange Camp Road. About 33 or 36 of which is Lake Helen, about 17 is the land, which is roughly 15. He owns all of it. He bought all of it, with the exception of what we call the thumb piece, the little piece that sticks up along I-4. It's like 3.5 acres. He's been under contract for that whole time. Has a basically open-ended option with the billboard company that dirt originally, but they're happy they got their signs. They're in no hurry. So that's just waiting to close until anything else closes. I mean, we're talking about having, $10 million wrapped up in this dirt and just paying taxes and insurance on it. And there is no one interested in anything. No one is under contract to buy anything except the multifamily. Right? And that's why we brought what we brought. The townhomes and the multifamily. Put it down, no problem, legislature passes this, so here we are. the way I've approached it with the Brendan and Hill Point is the name of the developer that we're under contract with the apartments that I represent both. The way I've approached it is I'm not interested in fighting over, we don't have the time to fight over any of the gray area. And there's a lot of gray area in this law, right? Like Scott said, right, there's a minimum, you can't make it to less than 65% of people mixed use. There's no minimum on a commercial, so is it 99.9%? I don't know, but I know it's 65, right? So what we've looked at it as is let's take away any of the places we could possibly fight about, figure out what we're entitled to do and see if it's economically viable, right? And so at 8 units per acre, we basically would have to make it all mixed use so that we get the full benefit of 36 times 8. We can do 288 units, 115 of them are going to be a minimum of 115 would have to be affordable under the definition of state. It could be 100%. It just has to minimum be 40%. And why that's relevant, and there's still doing the math. I cannot tell you if it would just be 40% or not. I suspect it would be more. And the reason is the new stuff they passed in the tax exemptions, if you make it affordable under all the definitions of affordable, right? So up to 120%, you get a 75% ad valorem tax abatement on each of those units that qualifies. If you do the category that just goes to 80% of the median, you get 100% tax abatement. Now, I don't think they'll probably do that because then it has some issues on rent, but it could be the other way. I'm not sure. That's for the apartment guys to figure out. It would definitely be the 40% because the law makes it. So what you would end up with is, okay, the whole thing is going to be mixed use, but the only user we actually have is the apartments. So they're going to be clustered down basically where they were on that one, thing we showed. They would roughly be over here, but clustered together. I mean, they're not going to be spread out over 36 acres. It's cost prohibitive to do that. So they'll be pretty clustered together, and then the rest of it will be designated for commercial if it comes one day it comes. One of the disappointing things under this, if we go this route, which I don't think we really, this is the route we are planning to go. I'm not here to say, but if you'd rather do this, let's do this. I have no would you rather do this. We're just proceeding with this because this is what we know we have. So one of the problems with that is it devalues the remaining commercial property. One of the big things, we talked about it before. I said there's a reason why there isn't commercial yet on the land side, where they already have the entitlements, you do the office, the retail, all the other stuff. The only thing that has been willing to come at all right now that would come tomorrow would be a convenience store. But even the problem with that is we can't afford to build out the intersection of the roads, the sewer, and everything else because we would actually lose money to sell it at the convenience store. We need to have more first. Well, the more isn't going to come until there's an anchor, right? So for any commercial development, you need one of two things. You either need an anchor store like a Publix or a Target or a Walmart to attract all the other little stuff, or you need a lot of butts and beds. And the more money those butts make that are in those beds, the better commercial development you get around it. And so it's, that they're all interrelated to each other. I think the idea of economic incentives to attract commercial stuff is fantastic. I think, and I hope it's something Lake Helen will pursue with the Stewart property to the north. It's too late for this property. Unless somebody were to come along and buy it from Brendan with the intention of doing that, because they've got the ability to hold on to it for a year or two or three while they negotiate those deals with some end user, it's too late for Brendan. So I love the idea. It's too little too late for this 36 acres we're talking about. I think it's a great idea to spur the growth to the north on the cow pasture property. Probably something that, the land of Lake Helen kind of split that property too. It's probably a great idea to try and attract tech or something like that to come up there. It's just not something he can wait for. He has a developer now under contract now that will build apartments now, and we can build 288 now. And so he doesn't have any other options. This is not first of all, don't get me wrong, I'm not asking for a pity party for Mr. Hurley. He's a businessman, he took a risk, it didn't work out, right? That happens. but he is not a billionaire conglomerate multinational company. He took everything he had and sunk it into this project, right? And it is killing him. So he has an option that was created by this, and he's got to exercise it. We don't have time to spend months going back and forth of, well, would you take 350 market rate apartments in a mixed use and lay it out? I'm not saying we're not all ears, but if there's a proposal like that the city or its planners or somebody wants to put forward, of course we would listen to it, but it really needs to happen fast, because once Hill Point starts going down the road of doing the real civil engineering to plan this out and lay this out, I mean, there's not a lot of extra dollars in this. You know, there's just not dollars to spare. And those things are very, very expensive. So that's, you know, I think where Scott and I are on the same page, when we wanted to be on the same page, is what can we do that we know we wouldn't, neither side would need to fight over. Now, backing up to what, if we were going to fight over something, I'm telling you, right, we don't have the luxury of time to fight over it, so we're not going to. We're just going to take the minimum. What we would fight over is, well, you know, was it Lake Helen Villas? You know, I think that's more like 12 units per acre. You know, and so if it's deemed that 12 units per acre is actually allowed at Lake Helen, then we'd be talking about 432 units, you know, maximum available out there. But it can take a court 9 months to figure that out, you know, and we're not interested in fighting about it.
But when you come up with the 288, that's 8 units an acre over the whole 36 acres.
Correct.
So how does the mixed use, or is that something you and I disagree on?
No, I think part of it's set aside for commercial out parcels within the 36, and part of it's
I guess it's a layout, and it is exclusively commercial and not, if it's all clustered, then I don't know how much of the land can be counted towards 8 units an acre.
I think your comp plan says density is applied over the it's gross density over the area that has the classification.
Over the area devoted for residential development, is the way it actually is worded. So,
But mixed use, I mean, the whole thing is the whole thing.
well, so that may be where area is. So, you know,
I'm just, that's just the way in any other PD we've ever had, right? Like it's, you know, if you take you know, DeBerry, for example, you've got that spot at the corner of, it'd be like Dirksen in 1792.
Yeah.
You look at what their maximum density allowable is in DeBerry, I think it's 16 units per acre, but and within that PD, they're clearly under 16 units per acre. But if you just take the parcel that is the apartments, it's like 22 units per acre. Because you're taking the gross density and applying it over the PD. I mean, I'm not saying it couldn't be interpreted another way, like you
yeah, that's what it says. It says gross land area, density is based on gross land area. Gross land area shall be construed to represent all land under common ownership proposed for residential development, excluding water bodies. I mean water bodies. So when it says proposed for residential development.
So it's mixed use, anything
it's
that's
mixed use,
not.
it's all residential, it's all commercial, it's just wherever it goes.
Yeah, that's the point of ambiguity.
Well, that's ambiguity in our code.
Yeah.
You know,
Well, and then we get into the thing of, well, okay, then we would just propose that it's 99%.
I was going to say, that I half jokingly said, you know,
Yeah.
you put a hot dog vendor pad out there.
Well, and I think Scott and I agree on this commercial. I think the only way you can really draw the conclusion, it's poorly drafted for sure, like when you look at their intent and look at what they specified as a minimum and didn't specify as a minimum, they only gave the minimum for the residential side, not for the commercial. Right? And so, and when you look at the whole thing in context, what they're trying to accomplish, I think what they're trying to accomplish is, if this happens to put a city that is starving for commercial dirt in a position, you know, where they now have to allow multifamily on one of the few places they have commercial, it gives them the ability to say, well, no, you got to put some commercial there, right? But also give the flexibility to the city to say, well, I don't want to have commercial just for the sake of having commercial. If it's better for us to have all residential or 99% residential, let us have 99% residential. I think that's probably the only way you can combine the intent with the language, is to say,
They gave it the room to be flexible.
right, I mean, you know it's not going to be exactly 65-35, and you've only got a minimum set for one. You know so we know it can't be 64, right? And we know it's not going to be exact, so it can only go the other way. I mean, it's poorly drafted, but I think that's the only way you can interpret and give the whole thing meaning. And ultimately, that's what courts do, right? They say if there's ambiguity, you have to interpret it in a way that gives the whole thing meaning. And that's, I think, the only way to get it meaning, so.
So when you said that, it's too late for this project, it says, then there is no version of the last version that you put on the table, that's alive any longer, that's dead.
Well, I wouldn't say it's dead, it didn't, I don't think we've ever gotten the impression there was any desire to do it. Now granted, this is a new law, there's a different landscape, there's a different context.
Well, I mean, to reiterate, the last version that we saw was apartment complex and mixed commercial.
The last version we saw was 16 acres of apartments, 300 units, and then the rest commercial, not parcels that would be, built eventually maybe. But that was zero affordable. That was all just the apartments they wanted to build. Didn't have anything to do with affordable because that was before this law. I think, could be wrong, right now, Mr. Doan is saying that all they're pursuing currently is the potential 288 that this new law would allow because they know they can get that. They're going for what they know they can get without a fight because they don't have time for a fight. And that would be 288 with 40% affordable.
At least.
I think at least could be 100.
Yeah.
If we turned around, we, the commission, turned around now and said, let's revisit this and say, Mr. Hurley, you can put in that last version of 300. I think they would probably jump at that. You haven't said that because you haven't had the reason to say that, and I understand where you're coming from, but I think that would be still on the table. I think they would prefer that. I haven't heard that from any, I'm just assuming. I haven't heard it anywhere else. I haven't had any backroom conversations.
I thought it was sort of somewhat veiled that if you put some incentive on the table for the commercial side of it.
No, I want to clarify that because at least never from my understanding were we ever asking for any incentives.
That was never brought up before, in my recollection.
Yeah, no, the only time that has been brought up is when I was talking about the context of long before this, right? When the attitude was, well, we don't want this to be residential, we want it to be commercial. Our response is, yeah, we would love for it to be too. We would love for Amazon or somebody else to come along and want this, but they're never going to come unless there's an incentive. So we're talking more about that.
It's more philosophical.
Right, not.
It was after,
Yeah.
I think it was like a day or two after the vote where you voted no on the comp plan change.
Yeah.
I reached out to Rob and we had email exchanges.
Yes.
And that's when the idea of incentives started coming out.
Yeah.
He said more or less, look, commercial's not gonna happen, may not happen anyway, but for sure it's not gonna happen without incentives because everybody does it. And you're gonna have to find a way to entice people.
I figured when we got down to the individual commercial things that would immediately be better.
Well, commercial's still gonna happen, but it's gonna be on the Dillon side.
Well, and here's
It was a commercial stuff on our side.
here's another thing that, everybody has to be a little bit cognizant of, is this PD expires in November.
Right.
So in November, you're gonna have 36 acres, and the only entitlements on it are what's entitled under EC, which basically says, as intense as you can possibly put anything commercial. And once there's so it's rights without entitlements when you got the land use and nothing else, and the standard changes legally a little bit too, right? Not everybody here was around our first go around with the auto mall, but when Brendan first bought all that property, we had some BPDD, we said county highway commercial zoning entitlements on a big chunk of it. Then there's some weird ag parcels and some weird residential parcels. But truck stops were allowed under that highway commercial, right? Because why wouldn't they be? It's on an interstate, it's highway commercial. And that was the only thing we had at the time that where people were calling the Fords before Brendan bought that Ford piece, and then calling Brendan saying, and everybody knows it's been following us for the last 15 years, truck stops are desperate to come in West Volusia. There's nothing to the north, there's nothing to the east, they're desperately in need of one. And they will pay a ton of money for dirt to get it, or per acre to get it. And that was a real thing. People said we were using it as leverage to get the auto mall passed. It was a real thing. It was, we want to build an auto mall, but if we can't, we got to sell the land to the highest bidder, and that was the highest bidder. If this thing expires and gets stripped and we're not doing anything else with it,
That's back.
they're going to start calling it. Right? And it's
So I'm assuming,
it's allowed under the land use.
so, no, I don't want to assume. So what I'm hearing is that, right now, the apartment, whether it be what we talked about a month ago, or whether it be under this new law, the apartments would be the most profitable for Mr. Hurley. But if all of that expires and he has nothing left, a truck stop would be a default, and it would
Well-
be less profitable, but it would still might be where you'd have to
Oh,
go.
I don't know that it would be less profitable. I think it would probably.
It'd be it's a high demand.
For him, it would probably be more profitable, but it's down the road, it's speculative, and even if they wanted to do it, they wanted to buy it, they would need to do soil testing, they would need, to go through a PD process, and it's still not a good option, it's still not a better option.
It's still a far off
than
option,
apartments.
and that's not what
This
Mr. Hurley
is-
was looking for.
This is real and now, right? So if we turn in an application on July 1st that says we want to do these 288 units, assuming Scott and I end up agreeing on how that gross density applies, we want to do these units, we don't even need a commission hearing. It's just, we're entitled to it. We basically skip to the step of site plan and construction plans, just as if you have a lot that's already entitled for a single family house, what do you have to do next? You have to submit a site plan and get your building permit. That's the step we skip to on July 1st with respect to the apartments. We still have to meet your architectural standards, we still have to meet setbacks, we still have to meet density. All those things, except density, entitlement, and height. The height, it's 80 feet. I mean, we could go to 80 feet. It wouldn't make any sense to go to 80 feet with these apartments. It wouldn't, construction costs wouldn't make sense. These would be 3-story, almost certainly. Probably wouldn't be 4. There's a price jump per square foot when you go to 4 stories and above for various reasons. But it would almost certainly be 3. But that's the theoretical entitlement, because EC, the stuff to the north allows 80-foot tall buildings in the cow pastures. And the auto mall was allowed to be 80 feet tall. So actually, everything had to go for it. But that's and first let me back up for a second, because on a personal level, I'm a big fan of home rule. And if you would have gone back 20 years and asked a room full of political scientists and politicians and said, I'll bet you $1 million. I mean, I'd love to go back and make a stat. I bet you $1 million that in 20 years, a state of Florida government with a Republican-dominated Congress and a Republican governor's mansion is going to pass a law mandating affordable housing as an entitlement anywhere in the state, regardless of comp plan or zoning. People would have taken your bet left and right. They would have never believed it was possible. I mean, especially for a Tallahassee that always is saying Washington should be able to tell us what to do, but they have no problem telling the cities and counties what to do. But it's the law, and it's not going to change. And, there are absolutely people who are just using it as a threat right now, developers, as a threat to get the commercial development they want. If they want, they'll all do affordable housing. We don't, I think it's about as transparent as it can get. We don't have any other option. It's our only option. There's nobody else. We're not saying give us an industrial plant or a chemical plant or else we'll build affordable housing. We don't have any other option.
We just need a time machine to go back a couple of months and vote again, and that way it's saved everybody time. Right?
We
Well,
always
and-
have that.
So,
You can always follow.
so here's,
You can always listen to my wisdom. I
Well-
can't be right every now and then.
But we do have that option.
well,
You do? We have a time machine?
No. We have that option to go backwards in time, and
yeah.
as a commission, we can say, Mr. Hurley, we would entertain the project that you proposed last month. We have that option.
The problem is Lake Helen has a district dropping a bowling ball on some foot.
I know. I know that doesn't happen in a vacuum. I do understand that. We've heard our own toes and we've heard other people's toes.
Well, I want to be realistic, I think, contractually, because I have the benefit of representing the buyer and the seller, right, Hurley and the apartment guy. That process, if we were to go back and say we're gonna do something more akin to what we proposed, that we do have to go back, there was a motion to,
We'd have to,
we have to go back and do the comp plan change, and then we have to send that up to Tallahassee. In the meantime, we have to revise the development agreement. I am almost certain that based on the history and how things have gone, they're gonna want to attach within that process, within the PD amendment process. So in the Automall PD, if you recall, we actually have architecturals in there that say you're gonna be, because we didn't want to get into a fight for 10 years long over what the building is gonna look like. So we put stuff in there and said, as long as it looks like this, you can build it. They will probably, almost certainly need that kind of level of detail. And I think it's good for the commission to have that level of detail too, to say, all right, well, if we're gonna do apartments, as long as you meet these design criteria, and obviously building codes and everything else, but the design criteria part, what they can't afford to do is spend another 2 years talking about the shape of the sconces, and stuff like that.
I agree.
But, so that's why I say we're not,
Personally.
yeah, I mean, it just is, it is what it is. I knew this law was coming in some shape or form, or at least it looked like it was, but things were changing constantly. There were 6 or 7 different drafts. I never even brought it up to Mr. Hurley until the past, because I didn't want anybody to worry about something that wasn't real. Somebody asked me the other day, why didn't you bring this up before the first vote? Because it wasn't a law.
It wasn't law.
And it would have just been seen as leveraging, do this or else this might happen.
Idle threats.
Yeah.
Nobody likes to hear idle threats, and I would not have appreciated it had you brought it forward that way.
Yeah, it wasn't real. A lot of apartment people that we could have been under contract with, that they were getting ready to build luxury $6,000 apartments, they probably would not still be involved because it would be around. No point, this is an easy pivot for them. No point, it's just an easy pivot for them to go to the affordable model. They kind of, they have a floor plan, they like to do 2-2s, so they can do some other stuff that would fit, with not a lot of modifications. So for them, with the tax incentives, to the extent they were going to lose units, they can make it up in the tax incentives. So it is what it is. It's a
So, you understand that those tax incentives, when we look at all those revenue models, if they get tax exemptions, they knock 75–80% of all their revenue. They don't knock off the cost, have it projected, but the revenue goes away.
What do you mean the revenue goes away? Our revenue, the city's revenue? Okay.
The revenue that comes off, that was based on property tax.
You still end up with more than you have now off the rate, but significantly.
But less than we would.
Fewer units, less.
And the cost will go down.
Yeah.
Whatever the taxes over there.
Can't get blood out of this town.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt either of you. It's historically, part of what we do is open the floor to comments from the public. If anybody would like to comment, I see one hand already. Ms. Brasko.
Yes, hi. I know, Mr. Doan, you mentioned about the process, how it's been a very slow process. Very slow as far as moving on with outside of when we went from the auto mall into the idea of multifamily home, this process slowed down almost to a halt. And it's been like pulling teeth. If our commission and our administration give the incentive of speeding this through, of what you had offered previously with the multifamily homes, apartments, the 3-story apartments, let's not even get into the detail of the story right now, but going with what was brought up last time, if we give that incentive of speed, of pushing this through and allowing this to go at a fast rate without any holdbacks. I'm not saying that it's a card, blank card, you can just go with what you want, but that we work with you on a fast pace and proceed this through at a timely fashion. Would that be something that you can take back to Mr. Hurley and see if he's open to?
I very much want to focus on today forward and not how we got here. I think it's fair to say, like I said before, open ears to whatever's being proposed. But Hill Point, more than anybody, is the buyer. They have to start designing this and going forward with it. And so there's, you know, the city could make a 100% sincere pledge that we're going to put our foot on the gas and do this as fast as we can. There is still a lot of work to do just in the process. On our end, on the city's end, I mean, there's inevitable back and forth. There's, well, I don't think the setback meets, right? I mean, there's work to do. So it was
still the
Yeah,
same
it
process.
yeah,
before,
still, you know, and some of that process is the same, right? We just, I think what we would have to do is start working on, the only pledge we would need is the only one you can get, is that we would start working on the details of the development agreement at the same, right now, not wait until after the comp plan amendment is done and stuff like that, because we already get to skip to that step anyway, under the affordable air cap, you know. that's July 1st.
That was really,
But I can't, I don't want to, I want to be real careful of one thing though. It is entirely possible that Hill Point is doing the math on the tax abatement and everything else and saying where we would rather have 288 units with the tax abatements than 300 units at the market rate. I don't know.
I understand that.
So it could be that the city were to say, we want to go back to that plan.
You missed your opportunity.
And they might say, we're better off doing it this way. I'm not privy to the math, so I don't know. And I don't know that the math exists yet. I think they're trying to figure that out.
Previously, wasn't affordable housing a small percentage anyways?
No.
No, that was never on, that, anything else.
I mean, it was
I thought there
always,
was-
we can't prohibit
That's-
affordable housing.
That's what I'm talking
But it was
about.
never, on the table as being a possibility. And the discussion was the quality that would be built, all the other sort of details in there kind of made it not really suitable for affordable housing.
I mean, from a developer's perspective, when you've got this whole 50 acres, right, and there's definitely commercial space, whether it's on the lake, and that's the one thing we can't forget, right? Holistically and from a development model, from the economic supply and demand model, this isn't a 36-acre project, it's a 50-acre project. And the 17 acres on the land side are the ones that are adjacent to the road and the utilities, right? So that's always going to be the best place for the commercial stuff. So from a developer's perspective, the reason why you would be less likely to see affordable, unless it's the only path, is because it devalues that commercial property.
Right.
I just remember the conversation that Scott just mentioned about you can't really stop it. Oh, I wish we had a time machine and we can go back on those three votes because
Look, I
I mean,
mean,
we
I
had an opportunity.
my in-laws, my mother, me, my brother-in-law, we live closer to this project than most of the residents of Lake Helen. All right, this is not where I saw it going. This is not where I personally hoped it would go. What we were going to build with the auto mall, I know, of course, 80-foot tall buildings and vertical, it scared a lot of people. It was going to be one of the most impressive, environmentally conscious commercial structures built in the United States of America. With the rain capture in the walls, with the solar, with the recirculation of all the water, it was going to be one of the most amazing engineering and architectural things. I mean, it was something that as a construction lawyer, I was saying, this is what they're going to give me the Lifetime Achievement Award for at the Construction Law Institute in 20 years, is that I was the lawyer to help bring this to fruition, right? And because of what I do, I get it. I get the not in my backyard. I get the sky is falling mentality anytime anything's going to be built where there's nothing existing originally. But I also knew that it wasn't going to ruin anybody's life, you know, if it got built. I mean, there were people literally sold their houses in Victoria Gardens and moved away when it got approved. And I thought that was an overreaction, and I think if it would have gotten built, it would have been great for Lake Helen, and it would have been great for DeLand, and it would have been wonderful. But it's just never going to happen. And You know, if you would have said 5 years ago, well, what we're gonna end up talking about is an affordable housing project here, I would have also said you were crazy. You know, it's not the way they want to see it.
Okay. Mr. Burke.
Hi. I kind of represent the time capsule people.
And when I said no one was here before, I should have said except me.
But the reality is that although there were pros and cons about the auto mall, the fact that they did annex into Lake Helen is why we're having this conversation now. Because had they not come into Lake Helen, then it would be a DeLand situation. So it has evolved from 11 dealerships down to 6, and all the other things that once they were going to come into Lake Helen, that they were zoned for, part of my expression, titty bars. But that's what we were facing with. The one thing that by having a single landlord with Hurley, then all of that would be encapsulated into that. When he started breaking it down and said, well, I can't do 11, I'm gonna do 6, or what are you gonna do with the other pieces? Then we were now looking at, a whole different program. But this law that just came in, I just came out of Tallahassee about 3 weeks ago. This law that came in is basically put a fast track, and it has eliminated options. We don't have the kind of leeway that we have with the auto mall. Can you give us this? Can you give us that? It's either going to happen or it's not going to happen. So I think what we are going to have to look at is what's the reality.
Sure.
And the reality is that we can make I'll use my language, a quick buck by being able to have this come in now without all of the long-term arguments. What you did say about the incentives, and you brought up the incentives would be based on future revenue that would not be necessarily coming out of our pocket. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, and I'm talking really, I don't, again, let's put it in the right context. Before this Live Local Act, before this was on the table, when we had just gotten shot down for our comp plan change to allow any residential, and the comment of the commission was basically, at least from 3-2 perspective and a little bit of prayer and contemplation on the dais, was we're not going to do any residential west of I-4 period. Right? That's the end result of that, shooting that ordinance down at the time. Is it wasn't, no, you can't do 540, it's 0, right? That's the only thing that was voted on, yes or no to that ordinance. And so in the conversations that followed, basically our attitude at the time was, okay, you keep saying no, but you haven't said what you want. And what I'm hearing at the commission in the audience is, well, this needs to be a commercial place, it needs to be, why can't we get an Amazon, why can't we get a distribution center, why can't we get something like that? And my response to that was, because you can't compete. And if you want to get something like that, you've got to get in the game on the incentives, and you've got to do, and yes, those incentive deals that we usually are part of structuring when we work on them, it's that concept of, it kind of works like a CRA, it's not a CRA, but it works in the same way, in the sense that right now you get, like Scott said, you're getting $10,000 a year revenue, let's say, off the taxes. Well, once this is built, you're going to get $100,000. And so the incentive agreement is usually something along the lines of, okay, during the first 5 years, the owner of the property is going to get 50% of the increase. You're always going to get what you were already getting, but for that extra $90,000 for the first 5 years, the developer or the owner of the company that builds there is going to get half of the tax increase back, and then 40% back, and then 30%, and it fades out. It's not forever, but just to help recover the cost of the roads, the utilities, cover some of the construction costs. A lot of times, there's state programs that tie into that you get additional tax rebates for job creation. So if you hit certain job targets, you get an extra, $20,000 a year, $50,000 a year at the state level and job things back. I think Deltona gave away the house, as I recall. I wasn't involved in it, but I think they basically gave away 100% of the tax increment for the first couple of years, and then it slides back down, but they got them, and now they just got an extra 1 million square feet too. And so right now there is a considerable amount of dirt available at the 44 exit. There's still quite a bit of dirt left at the 472 exit, and it's more attractive in those two places in the sense that you have a lot more dirt to work with. Here, theoretically, you've got the cow pasture to the north to work with, except it's part of the Victoria Park DRI. You can't do industrial, you can't do distribution center. Back when the DRI very first got passed in the late 90s, it did allow those uses, and then they quickly changed it. And changed it to where it's just basically office buildings, up to 80-foot tall office buildings, up to like 4,000 parking spaces worth of density. I mean, it's incredibly dense, but it's office. And what they were trying to copy was Heathrow. Yeah, and nobody's building it. I mean, all that office space at Heathrow is available. You know, nobody's built an office spaces. So that DRI is hard to amend, though. I mean, you got to go through the DRI amendment process. It could be done. I'm sure Glenn and Lake Helen could get it done, working together, and the Stewart family, if they've got a captain elected to speak for the team, then you know they'd probably be interested in getting it developed too. But for our piece, I mean, you would be talking about, even if we had, you know, Dollar General wanted to put a distribution center in there today, right? It's not going to be a million square foot Amazon, something that would fit right there. Even if they were knocking on our door today, you're talking about 2 years, you know, 3 years of negotiating their due diligence, looking at the engineering, figuring out what it would cost, figuring out what tax incentives they need, negotiating that. And you know, if there's a middleman that wants to come in and buy the property and wait that out, please forward name and number to Brendan right away. But he just doesn't have time. He doesn't have time to wait for it.
Since I have the year, I want to also remind us that we do not have Super Memorial Cemetery back in Lake Helen, so I had to do a shameless plug for that.
No, it's not shameless. I always keep that in my mind. I would love for that to happen.
Keep in mind that
Have they approved that yet?
Huh?
Have they approved that yet?
No.
They're working on it.
Well, and I also, you know, I'm not playing the poor Brendan card. He's a businessman, took a risk, it didn't work out. But to anyone who sees that, oh, he's going to sell the apartments for a couple million, the land for a couple $1 million here and a couple $1 million there, that's just a fraction of what he's got in it. I mean, he is not going to make $1 on the automobile. There's no conceivable path forward where he makes $1 if he sells all 50 of the acres in the next 3 years, you know, gets this done. It's just a matter of minimizing how many millions the loss is at this point. Nobody owes him that favor. He's a big boy. He's a businessman. He took a risk. He lost it. But the only reason I'm bringing it up is, again, it's not like he's a billionaire who can sit there and say, well, I think it would be best for everybody if we can attract some industry here, and I'm willing to sit there and wait. He doesn't have the option.
Well, it's perfectly understandable and honorable that he's looking to minimize his loss. There's nothing wrong with that. And there's also nothing wrong with the city seeking to get the best for the city. And hopefully those will come into alignment at some point. And that's still, I'm hoping, possible. Mr. Preston, I want to keep the floor open, so I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Todd Preston, 352 Connecticut Avenue, still. I just want to say, I am a time machine. And I want to be on the record and say, I told you so, okay? More than 5 years ago, when I started addressing the commission, I told you, I said, look, you don't have affordable housing here. Your development codes are gentrifying the city, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I became meeting after meeting after meeting, so here's the time machine. That's all I'll say on that. The ramifications, the tax consequences between mixed use under this new law and the normal tax revenues with a mutually agreed project. This new law has tax abatements. The law requires that affordable housing for a 30-year period, but it also allows the tax abatements for a 30-year period. Plus, the law, if I'm not incorrect, allows for reduced impact fees, quite a bit. Mm-hmm. So if you let this go to 2 more months to July 1st, and it transfers over to the new law, and they come in and they have to just put in their plans, the revenue to the city up front is significantly less, and over the long term, because 30 years, none of us are going to be sitting here arguing this, I don't think. So, I really strongly believe, and I would encourage you to try and meet Mr. Hurley at the table and see if he still has other project on the table, because right now, without hashing over any total, you're talking about 288 apartments. He proposed 300. So you're talking about a difference of 12 apartments to negate possibly multi-millions of dollars of revenue over the next 5 to 10 year period. I really strongly recommend and urge you to consider bringing him back to the table now as quickly as possible, because clearly something's going to get built there. I also want to say another thing. I just want to point out, this law that you're talking about today isn't just about Hurley, it's about the whole city. It applies to every piece of property in the city where somebody might want to come in. So stay focused on that, because there are other pieces of property as the pie gets eaten up. There are pieces that nobody is paying attention to. There's a 5-acre plot right over here behind the concrete plant. It's been empty for a long time. There's 40 acres right there on Ohio Avenue. What's that up on John Street? 40 acres? There's 40 acres right out here in the pasture.
I think it's 46.
Somebody could come along.
Is it commercial or industrial?
Pardon me?
Is it commercial or industrial zone?
I don't know.
Because it only applies to commercial and industrial. It doesn't apply to residential.
Main Street is
No, I'm
commercial.
saying the law doesn't apply, it's something other than commercial, industrial, mixed use.
Okay.
There's one way, we don't have very much commercial, industrial.
But we have some in downtown Florida, right?
And wherever it is.
So we can bring it right down to our front door. So I just want to urge you to stay focused on that. And then the last thing I just want to say is, I believe that there's a difference between, especially in this law, affordable housing and low income. Some people still associate anything affordable to low income. So there's a difference, I think. Low income, some people call it Section 8. It could be subsidized housing, but when you're building new and you're building affordable, it's based on the median income. It could be, 120%. My interpretation is that a person that makes 120% of the median income in the area, what can he afford to qualify for a mortgage? That's what I perceive to be what they consider affordable housing, whether it's rent or a mortgage. So affordable doesn't necessarily mean low-income housing. That's it. So let me park down the time machine.
Brandon, quick question. You have to be quick. One quick and a follow-up. Our gateway standards, do they extend over the overpass? Or are they on this side? And do we get does the new state law override our gateway standards?
Well, the new state law only deals with the use of the property, the intensity, which units per acre, and height. So if there was a property that was still that fell under commercial, industrial, or mixed use, that someone pursued a multifamily development with affordable housing on it, they would still have to meet all the other development requirements, other than use, density, and height. And when it's still subject to height and density, but it's not on that particular property. So you find out what is the highest density allowed in the city, and that can be allowed on that property, even though that zoning is on, the land use zoning on that property doesn't allow it, they're entitled to it. What's the maximum height within the city within 1 mile? They're entitled to it. And then regardless of commercial, industrial, they're allowed multifamily use within that. But they have to comply with all the other requirements, which include gateway.
And our gateway standard starts at the side of the overpass. Is that where we start, or is it right at Summit?
No, it's up to the municipality.
It's to the interstate.
Yeah, but it doesn't matter if it's considered gateway, employment center, downtown development. If it's only zone, if it's only allowed commercial, industrial, or multi-use, those are the only ones that are affected by this law.
So I guess my only point is, regardless of what gets built there, it's the aesthetic appeal, I think, that's more important.
And what we had said, and again, I can't guarantee that they're not already farther down this path than they want to come back from, but what we had said previously was that to the extent we were seeking to change the development agreement itself, right? Land use need to be changed, a lot of residential development agreements where the meat of the uses and the densities are. What we had said before was, we actually had, because we worked very closely with the land and Lake Helen negotiating all that in the first place, there's some pretty intense landscape buffers, standards around I-4, around Orange Camp Road, and we weren't seeking to change any of them. We were wanting to keep all of that the way that it was. The only thing we were changing was what was necessary to change to allow residential to be there, so the uses and stuff like that. But the buffering along Orange Camp, we weren't proposing to change. The buffering along I-4, we weren't proposing to change. That wasn't, at the time, wasn't part of the plan to change any of that.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I would say, one of the things I think is also not clear to the end of the law is, say, they decide to pursue a development that's allowed under the law. Can't do it under existing zoning that we have there, so we go and we say, okay, the land use that allows it is your downtown commercial land use. That's the highest density allowed. Well, within the downtown, and we want to have a mixed use project, but within, do we apply all the criteria of the downtown zoning classification to it? That, it doesn't say that in the law, but that would seem reasonable. Now, if that occurs in the downtown district, commercial district zoning, it says you have to comply with historical and gateway regulations. That's already in the law. It also says you can't have a building more than 10,000 square feet. So there's other things that are in that law where I said, before, remember I said, that's not a development agreement where we can negotiate. That you have to build to these standards, but if you build to those standards, you can go forward. If they pursue the law and they don't want to comply with those standards, then we have a mixed use PD. We want a mixed use. That gives us the ability to negotiate. Well, if we can't negotiate or agree to something, does that mean you have to go back to the downtown district and just comply with what those? Those are the things that really aren't addressed in the law. So,
And if, again, if this were a scenario where, Mr. Hurley or Hill Point at the time, money and appetite to fight over some of the nuances of this law in gray area to get more units, they would. But I'm just kind of flat out saying we're not even trying to pretend we're going to fight over it. It's not.
and when I read it, I kind of did my memo. I kind of did it the same way. I think what Rob explained how they looked at it. I looked at it from the perspective of what is it that we can interpret this in a way that they can't argue with. To say, not try to say that the highest density anywhere in here is 8. That's the highest one allowed. Is there some argument out there that it could be less? Maybe. But you're going to end up in court going through that process. So they really can't argue over 8 because there's nowhere in our documents that there's more than land use and zoning. So that's
What about the villas? Is that?
I don't know how the villas got built, but I mean, look at your existing zoning and land use. And here's the interesting thing. Our existing land use for downtown, the land use for downtown commercial district is 8. The zoning for downtown commercial district, 4. But the land use is 8. I said we go with the land use. That's, the villas may have been adopted under a different land use that we don't have anymore. We've amended the land use. I have no idea.
It says within a mile, and that's further than.
No,
That's just for the higher.
Oh.
But then this is in, but so the counterpoint on our side of it with that, right, is that, well, actually, the only place your zoning or land use talk about multifamily, it says the density will be TBD by development agreement. So,
but the land use still comes into play.
The land use could still come into play, should still come into
come into play, and then, and all our land use.
And so that's actually probably, it happens all the time, probably a glitch between the comp plan and the zoning, because multifamily is always more dense per acre than single family. But if you've got a comp plan that just says 6 or 8, and you say multifamily is gonna be TBD, it almost certainly would be higher, right? So it's probably a glitch there, and glitches happen all the time too. But that's why we have land use lawyers.
Scott, can I
Security.
interject something there, which I think is a key? The law doesn't say the highest zoned use, it says highest currently allowed use, and they're allowing a higher density over there, so it doesn't, and none of them in there reference what you currently have zoned.
No,
It says allowed. Yeah, so, and if they're allowing it, it seems to me like the law would read.
Well, and actually the Lake Apartments right over by, one of the things we looked at right away, apartments over by Ivy Pond, you just take, the concept of, well, all that counts is the parcel you're actually building them on and do it out, that comes to 10 or 12 also. Now, I think those were approved and built before the current version of the comp plan and zoning regulations were there, but, if you're just trying to look for a place where there's actually attached, multifamily units in Lake Helen, that's something you can look at. I think there's 6 units there on half acre, right? So that comes out to 12 per acre also. So we've got the villas and those apartments, both are at 12 per acre. But again, we're not even trying to say we can do 12 per acre. We're saying, we'll go with the 8.
So the question in my mind is does allowed, currently allowed, does that mean what can be built now, or does that mean what has been built in the past?
It says the list authorized multifamily and mixed-use residential as allowable uses in any area zoned, commercial, industrial, or mixed use.
So allowable is a future present perfect tense or sort of, I don't know the English.
I honestly would probably, the objective argument side on the side of the city on that one and say that it's whatever's in the current comp plan.
That's what I would
Other stuff is grandfathered in.
Because we could have changed it, there could have been a higher density back then.
Right.
And
Well, that's what I'm thinking with the bills
so,
in particular.
so it was changed, so,
Yeah.
and
I couldn't find how the bill was ever got approved.
I don't know either.
I don't see a PD anywhere, and there's no zoning that would allow it. There wasn't any zoning that would have ever allowed it.
I have no idea.
I think it was in the 80s or 90s that it happened, I think. Good lord.
and it's kind of referred to, they use zoning and land use somewhat interchangeably in this code. So,
Try to find where Stewart Road between the county road.
the 8 units per acre, I think, is the highest our code, land use or code currently.
And you're both kind of landing on that. We can parse all of these particulars, but that's both where you're kind of landing right now, so it's
Yeah,
complicated.
I think we both landed on, either one of us could argue against 8.
8 seems to be,
I would have a hard time saying that
And the 8 is where we get the 288,
that's where you get to 8.
which is, again, 12 off of what Mr. Hurley brought forward before. In actually both scenarios, the initial one where we were looking at changing the comp plan, and then the last one where we were looking at, well, maybe this will work. They were both 300 for the apartments, which is,
I think we're still gonna have to,
maybe if this was a town.
I think we're still gonna have to change the comp plan if they are not, if we don't want to have to mandate them, which we don't want to have affordable housing.
Well, wouldn't it be possible simply to, the draft amendment to the comp plan that you had prepared, that we voted down? Yeah, I mean, the verbiage is there.
Just got to,
Just take
It's a little bit of
it.
tweaking, and I mean, just a little bit of tweaking, I'm assuming.
what's that?
It would be just a very little bit of tweaking. It wouldn't be very complex.
It would be, there,
It wouldn't be complex. You take townhomes out.
you could just put apartments in, you have density, you, have, are we going to require some level of commercial, as, where the townhomes were, that was kind of like the project that was submitted. And we have much more flexibility, I guess, if we sit here and negotiate something with them, we can agree more or less to whatever this commission and Mr. Hurley want to come to an agreement if we are forced to apply as written the rules, our hands are somewhat tied. You know, so that we have much more flexibility if we're drafting new rules to accommodate something. For instance, you know, you can allow, we could, if necessary, we may allow the layout in a way that even though we had an argument that you shouldn't be counting all this acreage for your residential density, we can tweak it to make sure you can. If we don't tweak it and we go with what are they allowed to as worded, they may not be able to get 288 units. And that's our area of argument, depends on how that language gets interpreted. Is the whole area being proposed for residential?
And my thinking is that the 288 is 12 units less attractive to a developer than 300. 300 is where they kept landing prior to this law ever being part of the conversation. 300 was kind of their minimum threshold of being a reasonable project. And I'm assuming that that's still
You almost won't, unless you can get into the tax abatement stuff, like you can in
Right.
affordable housing.
Let's incentivize it somehow.
Just about have to have around 300 or more units.
So my point is to try and squeeze it down to 288 doesn't benefit the city at all. The difference between 288 and 300 there is no difference to the city. So I think squeezing that little bit of blood out of the turnip would be absolutely
I guess,
almost fine.
and I'm not, just want to be sure I'm clear with what I'm trying to say is, yes, we can negotiate to allow 300 there, the tweaks, the changes, the rules do that. If they come through and try to say, we want to build under the law, what's allowed in your code, I can't say I agree that they're going to get 288.
I understand that.
It could be less.
It could be less.
So, I would say 288 would be the most they could get.
Right.
But is that?
And if we fought over some particulars, we might be able to get that down.
Well, I think the reality of it is if we were gonna fight about the 288, if there's gonna be a fight, then we would be fighting for the 12, right? We wouldn't even agree that it was 8.
Right.
If we have to fight anyway, we're gonna make the argument that it's the 12.
Right, if you're not agreeing, it becomes, the camps fall farther back. I understand that.
This is good office.
Yeah.
And then make a claim, Bob, so it goes both ways.
It does. Mutually assured destruction.
I'm gonna try to make it quick. To get the 8 per acre, that is figuring it over all of the acreage, including the commercial, is that correct?
36.
Okay,
To get to the 288.
yes,
Yes.
but of course, it's not gonna be over all of it, so then they're leaving some that will be commercial. So what's to say that that is being left, so we put all the residential on there kind of in one area and left the other for commercial, what's to say that commercial is ever gonna really go in there?
Nothing says it has to. The 288 easily fits within 16, 17 acres that they had originally brought to us, and that leaves
Even figuring-
20 plus acres.
I think, I think your question is the question I have, presumably for the commission. We do a mixed-use project. What happens if only residential zone families built? And then you have this, now they don't have an incentive to let it sit there and not be built.
Right.
Because obviously they have an incentive to get it sold and built. But is it theoretically possible that they just develop a residential and it takes a lot longer for that commercial to ever be built? That is a possibility.
That is a real.
The problem for us and Lake Helen is if the product that is the residential is the affordable housing, then that commercial lot is even less attractive than it would be.
And that is where hang on just a second, I'll get to you next, but that's where I see us still having a real offer to make here, because of almost exactly that. That's really, it's not leverage, but it's a reasonable part of the puzzle piece. And it does allow us to, I see that bringing it back to that 300 units that have nothing to do with affordable, does make all the rest of the land possible. It really does make it more attractive. I could be wrong. Like you say, you don't know what the math gurus are doing, or how far down that road they are. I do understand that. This is always, who knows what the future may hold.
Now, I would also say to speed the process up. Okay, I talked to Rob about it. The idea was there still has to be planning. Not much. It's,
We would have a motion to reconsider on the, I don't think that has to go back, right?
why should they just go straight to the planning board is what I'm trying to think. Instead of going back to the commission and back to the planning board, we just go straight to the planning board with, if you give us direction, go to the planning board and see what they say and bring it back to us for first reading. We can talk about that. That's just, I'm just trying to speed up the time frame.
And I think the fastest time frame is the commission just revotes on the comp plan that was the subject.
Yeah, but that was,
consideration.
that was not the transmittal hearing. That was vote on it, and then it was gonna go from there, it was gonna go back to the planning board, and then back to the transmittal. I'm trying to avoid that before.
I don't think it was gonna go back.
Yeah, it had to come back to them, because it still had to go to the planning board for recommendation. It had gone to the planning board.
I have two more.
So what I'm trying to think is, let's avoid going back to the commission, just to send it back to the
If
planning
the
board.
commission votes on it, we don't have to send it back.
But you have to have the planning board recommendation. Yeah.
No.
For the
Well,
company.
the recommendation was to deny it.
It was.
Did it go to
And
the
then-
planning board?
Yeah, it was.
Oh, never mind, never mind. All right, never mind.
So two more
I
comments.
didn't think it was.
We will have to go to the planning board with the zoning.
Yeah. My bad.
Mr. Preston?
Thank you, let me speak again. I just want to point out, he's talking about having a base or a hub, and you're wondering about whether that commercial would be developed. The thing that's going to get the commercial developed is opening up that access road. And that access road is not going to develop until there's a hub there to finance it. So whether it be this or something else, I think that's going to be the catalyst. You put that in, I presume that they'll build the access road when they put the apartment complex, hopefully.
That was the design.
But if that goes in and opens up that employment center, that's almost guaranteed to be the catalyst to develop commercial on both sides, for the land side and our side.
One thing I would point out is that without, so here's the rough.
That's on the land side.
Yeah, okay. So here's Orange County, here's Blackmore. The previous proposal included townhomes up here. So the way that cost allocation was split up before was that the combination of Brendan and the apartment developer were going to pay to get the road to here and over to here. The townhome developer was going to pay for the townhome developer's allocation. Right? So, but it'll be halfway there, the utilities will be halfway there. It's closer than it is now, but without the townhomes, that doesn't go all the way up. It'll go just past where the connection point is.
That's
To service all the commercial out parcels here and the apartments.
That's the first time that's being said. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean, I just
That'll be a catalyst.
want to make sure you're, yeah, it will be a catalyst.
It's a catalyst, and it's the most difficult part.
Well,
Getting it started off of Orange campus, the most difficult.
But also, I mean, that goes back to talking about the land in Lake Helen and the Stewart family having conversations about that land. It's been sitting there for 25 years, and people have sniffed around at it, but the issue was, one, the utilities used to be all the way back at the intersection between Victoria Gardens and Victoria Commons. Mr. Hurley paid to have them extended all the way to the site already. They're in the ground now to the corner of this site. So they're a little bit closer. This will get the road a little bit closer. You know, if the land in Lake Helen put together a concrete package that people can go shop to people up there and say, if you do at least this, and you invest at least this amount of money, and you create at least this many jobs, build at least this many square feet, we will extend the road, we will put utilities in, or we will give you a tax abatement to help you recapture the cost of doing that. That's what puts that dirt on the radar. There's something to do it.
Did we get?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Just a question, I didn't know, what was the sewage or
Utilities?
utilities?
Up to Delaney.
Gonna go back to the land?
Yeah.
They use our water? No?
No,
They don't use
their
our
water.
The land's water, the land's sewer.
And we pay a percentage of, we've kind of worked that out.
I'm late.
The land has the right to charge a surcharge to people outside their city limits. And Lake Helen has the right to charge a tap on to everything that's on there for utilities, even though it's
We can,
anything else.
yeah, whatever surcharge the land charges us, we can pass on to the landowner. So there's It's in this, all the way.
The land would be building, won't
They can, or they can wholesale it to
It
Lake
can go
Helen,
either way,
or
yeah.
do the building and add some.
That's by agreement.
Okay.
So at this point, I'm sorry.
I just wanted to mention something. The employment center area, the way it's zoned, that's still able to, in the future, be affordable housing under this new law. So it's something just to keep in mind and be aware of, that is always an option now.
And
So what we choose with this project right now gives us what's going to happen in the future.
well, it doesn't really set in stone anything that happens up there. That's just
But it
according
gives
to
more of
that
an
property
opportunity.
owner and what they.
You know, to be honest, even if we agree to do something, and then Mr. Hurley sells it to his people, and the buyers decides, we're gonna flip it, they can still pursue that law.
Yeah, the law is always
The
there.
law is always there, so even though we come to an agreement, they can still say, no, the law's been tweaked, there's been some interpretations, we're gonna pursue our rights under the law. So just because we reach an agreement with the current owner and current developer, doesn't mean somebody else down the road, something happens, the property gets flipped, they can't come back and say,
Yeah,
this is pursue the law.
This is
Because
a
the
new
only way you make the
set of
law,
rights that will always exist.
and the only way that you don't make the law not applicable is you make it residential. Then it's not applicable.
And it actually is another reason to start talking about incentives for that property in the north. And I mean, Mr. Hurley, I don't represent Stewart's, it just, I think, is a good thing for that area, but also, that is all zoned commercial right now.
Mhm.
Someone could come in with a massive, that's 80 acres.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
what Kelly was saying.
Yeah, somebody could come in with 80 acres of, a minimum of 8 per acre on the Lake Helen side of it and 20 per acre on the land side. And it actually, that whole pasture is kind of riddled with it's like Swiss cheese if you look at it on a map with little spots of wetland on it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you can go 80 feet tall, you can build around all the little wet spots. You can do little 6-story buildings out there and stuff too, but making it more attractive to commercial development so it's less attractive to that is another,
And that would be
good reason to do that.
640 units, if I'm doing the math right.
It's,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay, now I wanted to pull it back into the commissioners here and get y'all's thoughts, and if you have any, or you don't have to share, but I would like to give you the opportunity to share what your thoughts are.
I'm still in favor of multi-use, with offering incentives for the commercial, residential, apartments, whatever needs to be done.
And I think, not to speak for him, but he's said this many times, Mr. Basso is very much saying, he's very much in favor of pushing forward anything. Have either of you, on 1 or 4, been swayed, or have you any new thoughts?
I mean, everything that needs to be said was already said, so. 300 sounds better than 288 at this point.
300 without an affordable housing
Mm-hmm.
component sounds better than 288 with an affordable housing component. That's kind of where my mind is as well. What are you?
I agree.
Um, So then it would come back to, and I don't know that it absolutely comes back to this, but it in my mind, it comes back to whether or not we can open up that conversation again with Mr. Hurley and make it real enough to him to where, he's been burned here some, and it certainly feels that way. Whether he would trust us enough to start pursuing that, or whether he would just simply fall back upon what this law, he feels this new law.
I think and this is me speaking without the authority of Brendan Oil, but I think the reality of it is 288 and 300, even if you were talking 288 to a higher number, or 240 to 300, the footprint is close enough to the same, and the location is close enough to the same. And some of what they're doing right now won't be affected for another month or 2, right, to see how that goes. I need to talk to one point, because when they first looked at the law, they weren't thrilled about the possible reduction in units, number one, until they got a new tax statement part, and they said, we might like it better, we're still doing that. So that's why I said I want to be careful when I'm pumping the brakes. You know, I don't want to say, I'm sure they would rather do, I'm not sure they would rather do 300 market rate at this point. I don't know where that tipping point is on the math.
Well, basically what, I mean, the goal would be kind of in y'all's court. You want to
Yeah.
submit a revised comp plan amendment so we can bring it back for the June meeting. We got to meet tomorrow, I can't do it then, for other purposes. But if you want to bring it back so we can bring it to the June meeting for y'all's consideration, that would be something that would allow the drawing that he presented at the last workshop where there was the 300 apartments and then the commercial out parcels.
And, you know, if there's an appetite to do some type of economic incentive to make sure the commercial portion of it gets developed, that doesn't need to be part of this. I mean, that's something that doesn't need to go into a meeting. That's something that if the city talks to the consultants and figures
That's
that
not
out.
gonna see what they're gonna offer.
Well, it goes back
Yeah.
to Mrs. Ritchie's question or comment that, you know, what gives us any confidence that this will be developed in the future? The only confidence there is there's economic incentive and self-interest.
So there are things that we can always identify generally that say A, B, and C will make it more or less attractive to be developed, right? So better apartments make it more attractive, and the most apartments you can do make it more attractive, right? More butts and beds, and the more money they make per head, and that's what makes it attractive to commercial. It still may be, so if you look at this one, right? Luckily, it just happened to do this because it's the easiest map I had, I think, for wetland purposes, but this is where the wetlands are, the crosshatch stuff. And that's what I call the Lake Helen hernia that sticks out over here where the distribution center was going to go for the alcohol. So that's the most expensive dirt to develop. It's not high quality wetlands, so it's not super expensive to develop compared to some, you know, to convert it and swap it out and buy wetland integration credit somewhere else and do the build. But it is more expensive than dry dirt. And so it's going to be the last, you know, spot. If somebody can pick dry versus wet, they're going to pick dry first. Which means, you know, when you've got to extend a 4-lane road plus utilities plus mitigate wetlands, you know, those are all factors against it developing factor. You know, so maybe an economic incentive down the road, or maybe it's even a year down the road or 2 years down the road. Hey, the apartments are now underway and nobody's really biting at that piece. What if we talk to the land and talk about a way that I would still say really look at your jewel up there to the north, you know, because then it pulls this along with it, right? Some good packaging. But that, my point is, it doesn't have to be part of this discussion. We have never asked, I want to make sure anybody who leaves here and goes and talks to anyone, I want to make it clear, we have never asked for a dollar of economic incentive from either city for anything ever. Ever in any way, shape, or form. Yeah. The only thing I've ever said was, if you want to be competitive for big commercial stuff, like Amazon or something else, you're going to have to do that. But we have never asked for a
It's
dollar.
not just big commercial, even stores and everything, they're looking at.
A lot of them do it. So, you know, years ago, and I worked at the county at the time, I think. Maybe it was topical. At one point, I worked on the Tanger Outlet Center in Daytona, right? And the county rule for years was we don't do economic incentives for retail. You know, we do it for industry, we do it for tech, but we don't do economic incentives for retail. What changed the county's mind on it was they said, well, this is a game-changing retail, right? It's going to be enough of a hit to our economy in the county that it makes sense to do some sort of economic incentive. And again, it was the tax abatement, and it was to go for infrastructure and utilities and road network improvements to improve it. And I think that's the difference too. Even though economic incentives are usually in an industrial or heavy commercial complex, for Lake Helen, when you use the same math, right, is it a game changer or not? Is getting 20 acres of economic property actually developed instead of theoretically developed, enough of a game changer to offer an incentive? I mean, that's the question for Lake Helen to ask and answer. But obviously, if Brendan still owns the dirt at the point in time where you have that conversation, of course, I'm sure he would love if there were incentives to make it more viable for somebody to come along. But we've never asked for it, and we don't have any plans. It would be great if it happens, but.
The other point to consider, if they do go with the affordable housing and they get the tax abatement, if at any time, and the state calculates it every year, that the percentage of affordable housing falls below 40%, they owe 100% of the taxes for that period.
Yeah, we capture that.
So they won't be playing.
So they won't
too
get
much,
they won't get their tax incentive
Yeah.
during that time period.
Yeah, and going back to how everything's related, the lower the unit count, the more likely they're gonna go to the lower percentage of income so they can get the higher tax abatement. It'll be more units, it'll probably be 80% of instead of 120% of. I would guess, I'm just, I've represented enough department people to know that.
Like Todd said, affordable housing is not low income.
No, I mean, at the 120%, I think you're talking around a household income of around $60,000, which can be. So you could have.
2,000 more than the county.
I think it's between 50 and 80.
I think you use the county median wage for this. And
No, it would be the cities. There's one for Lake Helen.
I know there is one, but I think this particular Live Local Act cites the county median income for both city and county projects, I think. I'm not.
Well, might be between three, between the county deal and Lake Helen.
Well,
All three of ours are different.
Yeah. But it'd fall somewhere in a fairly similar range.
Or how different Lake Helen is, how different Lake Helen is from the full county.
Well, we're lower than D-Land.
Why not? Lower is a relative thing.
But I think, the biggest thing for today was Scott and I wanted to have the conversation mostly to let you all know, one, the law part. Everybody's starting to have time to digest this, what it means, what it doesn't, and it was funny when we first talked about it, because we were both like, I don't know who said it first, but one of us said, well, the way I looked at this was I wanted to take away any possibility for argument, and the other one said, yeah, me too, that's the way I looked at it. And we have 95% overlap, and the 5% that we don't agree is because neither one of us are sure.
And probably that 5% would not make a lawsuit profitable for either side, or the most reasonable course of action. Now, profitable is the right word.
Profitable for us.
Finally, you guys did it.
Truth comes out.
I think that's very transparent of you to say that.
He's not wrong. The last major lawsuit Lake Helen was that we were representing you, that it was against the land to get this property into Lake Helen.
Oh,
So let's do it.
What, get it into the land?
Let's get something approved here. Get something approved here is what I think the
so I think
superintendent
that if you agree, it's basically the ball's in y'all's court, see if you want to.
I need to talk to Hillpoint,
Okay.
because, they're the ones that are under contract to buy it, they're the ones that are doing the math. I need to know where they're at. Like I said, they went from, I'm not sure we like the idea of building under this, to this might actually be better for us, but we haven't done the math yet.
So math, in my experience, math
That's important.
it's important, obviously, yes, but it's also can happen very quickly
Yeah.
if the incentive is there. So they should be able to do that by 9 a.m. tomorrow, and and we can have a conversation over lunch.
That's right. She's a meeting tomorrow. Well, I will try and speak to them tomorrow after today, because I talked to them yesterday and I said, I need you to be confident that you're confident that you can do this project with these numbers, and that's when they told me, actually, we might like it.
Well, now it's going to bring me into my last thing that I was going to bring up, is do you have anything you want to ask any of us? Is there more clarity you're looking for from any given commissioner, or we can't vote on anything tonight, but you can ask us questions.
It's kind of just a little bit what I said before. There's a degree of certainty with the Live Local Act that we have that we don't have, not knowing what we might agree to. And I think that where there's definitely a hesitation or a gun shyness on Hill Point's part and everything else, because rewind before any of this even, when they first got involved, before there was any contention about anything at all, I said, you need to be aware. I said, what do you know about Lake Helen? I said, we know where it's at. I said, you need to be aware. When someone builds a house in Lake Helen, it goes to the city commission to talk about what size and shape the spindles are on the front porch. So you need to understand that, I recommend that whenever we get to a point of a development agreement, we put architectural agreements in at that point, because you could get in a 2-year conversation about whether it's wood shape or
Sidewalks.
vertical siding, how wide the siding is and everything else, right? And I mean, that's just, I have to advise my client that way because it's the truth. Not because Lake Helen shouldn't do it that way. I'm not saying you shouldn't. It's just the reality of how it's done.
It is,
And it's
past performance is the best indicator of future.
Yeah, it's the way it is, and I respect the way it is. But in order to then make a developer's timeline work, that they actually have certainty and can go get construction bids that hold up, it's better for them, and it would be better for us to work through those things. So I think my point is, if we're gonna do this, we need to get to a level of certainty in the development agreement part, which is the zoning agreement, and that might take a couple extra workshops and a special commission meeting to do it, that.
And we still want to do the same thing that we kind of worked out, where we do the first transmittal, we send it off, if it passes. Then we start working on a development agreement. And then we take that to the planning board, get their recommendation, we take it to the commission, get first reading.
Generally, yes, I would say, if Hill Point says they're interested in going back to the market rate model, I would probably start working on the development agreement now. I would personally work on the first draft and send out, so that we're not waiting to start that process for 6 weeks. Because I'm afraid if I tell them we're gonna wait 6 weeks to start that process, they're gonna say, well, forget it, let's just go with what we got.
At 6 weeks, we're almost to the law being.
Well, we don't have, unless we have a special call meeting, we don't have a meeting until June.
But we can have a special call meeting anytime. This is an important project for the city, and
just to make sure we comply.
I don't think any of us would balk at a meeting to address this, because this is very important to the city.
I have a question for you about Hill Point. So I guess I'd like to see if they're saying that it's more lucrative to move forward with the law version. What would the hinge be? So if it's going to be a difference of 300 to 310 to make it more, lucrative, that I'd be a little more curious to entertain as well. If it's going to be 600, then,
Absolutely. I mean, the way I kind of first presented this one before I was passed and everything else, as I said, I think it would be silly to assume Lake Helen would go back to the 450 that was proposed before, right? A compromise has to lie somewhere in between. So I had already said that in the beginning, so I wouldn't expect to bring something like that. I think it would probably, one, I don't know where the math lies. Probably a little bit of it. I don't know where their building count lies. We were only asking for 300 before, right? Most developers have a 12-unit building, a 16-unit building, a 32-unit building, or whatever. So however that works out, that might be part of it. So could it be that they say 312 is what we need to make it work? Yes, they could. But I will find that out as part of this conversation.
Okay.
And say this
Great.
is what they need.
Well, I think it's, you probably ought to give them, if you haven't, give them the downtown commercial district zoning. Because that's the one where, if you're going to use mixed use, if you're going to say this is what you're going to go through and build on, then those criteria would apply. The 10,000, maximum 10,000 square foot building, the setbacks, all those things. It's all outlined in there. So when they start calculating what is the benefit of
Yeah.
pursuing, it's more than just, let's get the tax abatement, what can we build? What can we build, more or less, what can we have a right to build that Lake Helen can't say no to? And then, and it's more than, it may not fit
Is
with
the
what we're talking about.
pattern that's online, is that still the applicable?
The pattern? Yeah.
Yeah, I think so.
Mr.
Yeah, how prepared are we to have 288 units that would break down my math, 3.4 persons per apartment? That would mean that we would have an increase of our population by 1,000 in how short a time, and how are we prepared to meet
It's a
that?
significant impact. That was one of my main factors when I initially voted not to allow it. That was one of my main factors. And that and the fact that nobody in Lake Helen seemed to be hot and heavy in favor of high-density residential development. And I have campaigned against it. I shouldn't say nobody. I'm not calling it nobody, especially I promise. But I have campaigned on not being supportive of high-density residential development.
That was the other thing too, because of this July 1st, it sort of takes out of it the political perspective as to whether or not you're for or against it, because the state is mandating it.
To make it, you know,
It should take,
to make it personal,
Takes pressure off.
if Governor DeSantis is the 600-pound gorilla in the room, I'm not even a spider monkey. You know, I'm not going to be wading in and making any impact there. He's changed the law. The legislature has changed the law, and so my protestations about high-density residential development are irrelevant.
Well,
it's just selling that to the public.
and
They're all gonna blame all y'all and all this kind of
when the law went into effect, I said to Scott, and I wasn't being snarky when I said it. I was keen on exactly that. I said, well, good news, we don't have to fight about whether or not apartments should be allowed anymore. Tallahassee, it was sarcastic in the sense that I was making fun of their imposition on home rule. But I wasn't being snarky to Lake Helen. I was just saying, what's the news? We don't have to fight about this anymore. Tallahassee made up their mind for us.
I think it was before, what, 78, everything had to go through Tallahassee to be approved anyway. If you wanted to put in a driveway, you had to go to Tallahassee to get approved.
So I think we're
Still don't know.
I think we, the city, are reconciled to the fact that this is a doable project by Mr. Hurley. What you just brought forward is certainly part of that equation. If there's a tipping point for Hill Point, it's too many points in there. If there's a tipping point for Hill Point, that would be, you know, maybe we should look at that, because I'm of the same opinion that approving 320, that makes it much more doable, makes things more, if it gives enough to them, it might be, you know, a negotiating point that would be well within what we should
also see how.
I mean, we were at 400 and something, so if we end up at 300 and change, I think we're in the ballpark.
If they said 390, then I can see where you would say, I think we'd rather have the 288.
Yeah, but there's,
Well, 8 times 50 is 400, so you got 50 acres.
Well, and you're not wrong, because the reality is, if they can't get enough on just the Lake Helen side, where it makes more sense to put the residential, and because of that, we're not gonna get you're exactly right. Right, but I didn't want the land to hear it from this meeting first, because
that was just one of our commissioners.
yeah.
But I don't know, their density is higher, so it might be higher on their side.
20.
Yeah, so theirs should be higher.
That's significant. That's significant. Well, I think we've said everything that needs to be said. Am I wrong?
Just wait until the garden's here. There could be an 80-foot tower right next to where the hotel was supposed to be.
40% is affordable, at least.
So, without objection,
So, the only other thing I'd probably add in there is, you know, it sounds like this commission is willing to call special meetings if needed.
absolutely.
You know, so if,
I am.
but
You don't have to come.
I'll buy pizza from Tom's.
Well, without objection, is it okay if we adjourn?
Yes.
Meeting adjourned.
See, every time I'm over here, in fact, that's what I check my phone, $5 text me, they're all Tom's.
And
Every time I'm
I think this,
Tom's,
these back to back.
I have another business.
Tom's is better, more congenial atmosphere. Tomorrow night, we'll make it to our business.
But I think maybe we look at that downtown.
No, that's not the
zoning
email.
code, just to see, understand the text.
Oh, I'm sorry, you said you had something. I think on adjourn us.
No, it's not a big.
Are you sure?
Yeah, just
I could have said it.
I'm already sold.
This is on the sidewalk.
Thank you, sir, for your time
Thank
tonight.
you. Thank you all very much for doing this.
And your explanation.
I think it's a better answer. It's sort of just saying that.